"Hand over your keycards and clear your desk by noon, Nate," Julian sneered, shoving the termination papers across the mahogany conference table. "We don't need a fossil holding back our $120 million property sale." I picked up my pen, signed without a word, and checked my watch. He thought he was stripping my authority. He had no idea he had just triggered the automated reversion clause on the 12 acres beneath his feet. That was 10:30 on a humid Thursday morning in mid-September. To understand how a 34-year-old corporate heir managed to collapse a 12-story commercial complex in less than 48 hours, you have to go back to 2004, long before Julian Vance ever set foot in Executive Suite 1200. I started at Apex Prime Properties 22 years ago. Back then, Metro Central Plaza was nothing more than 12 acres of overgrown asphalt, abandoned auto repair shops, and broken concrete sitting directly at the intersection of Grand Avenue and 5th Street. The city was expanding rapidly, but traditional lenders viewed the site as a toxic liability due to an old municipal land dispute. The original land had been purchased back in 1968 by my father through our family trust, the Miller Ground Trust. When Apex Prime's founder, Gordon Vance, wanted to build a premier 450,000 square foot luxury retail and corporate complex, he lacked the capital to purchase the dirt outright. My father and Gordon struck a deal that laid the entire foundation of Apex Prime's corporate fortune. Gordon's firm would construct and operate the 12-story tower and retail promenade under a 20-year master commercial ground lease. My father leased the underlying parcel to Apex Prime for a modest base rate, contingent on two ironclad conditions written into the original title deed. First, our family land trust retained fee-simple ownership of the underlying 12 acres. Second, because I had just completed my degree in commercial asset management, I was brought on as senior commercial portfolio director to oversee all tenant operations, zoning compliance, and municipal licensing. For 22 years, I managed every square inch of Metro Central Plaza. I knew the structural load limits of the underground parking garage, the mechanical specifications of the dual chiller HVAC units on the roof, and every nuance of the 45 commercial leases occupying the complex. I negotiated long-term tenancy agreements with national banking headquarters, upscale dining chains, and regional tech firms. Under my direction, Metro Central Plaza grew from a risky municipal project into Apex Prime's crown jewel, generating $18 million in annual recurring revenue. Gordon Vance was a tough businessman, but he understood the sanctity of contracts. He knew that commercial real estate isn't built on executive bluster. It is built on clear title, tenant retention, and razor-thin legal compliance. For 2 decades, our working relationship was flawless. Gordon paid the ground lease fees on the first of every month, and I ensured the plaza maintained a 98% occupancy rate. Everything changed 6 months ago when Gordon suffered a stroke and stepped back into an emeritus advisory role. His son, Julian Vance, returned from a cozy private equity desk in Chicago to take over as executive vice president of asset strategy. Julian was the kind of corporate manager who believed that 20 years of institutional stability could be replaced with aggressive buzzwords, headcount reductions, and financial re-engineering. He walked through the marble lobby wearing custom tailor-made suits, treating long-serving operations staff like line items waiting to be expunged. Within 3 weeks of taking the reins, Julian hired a boutique corporate advisory firm to prepare Metro Central Plaza for an immediate institutional sale. He wanted to flip the entire 450,000 square foot complex to an international private equity fund for $120 million. The transaction would yield an enormous windfall, granting Julian an 8-figure exit bonus and cementing his reputation as a financial prodigy before his 35th birthday. There was only one problem standing between Julian and his payout: me, and the upcoming expiration of the original 20-year master ground lease on October 1st, under my executive compensation agreement with Apex Prime, negotiated back in 2006 when we restructured the plaza's commercial zoning. I was entitled to a 2.5% master transaction fee upon any disposition, recapitalization, or long-term lease renewal of the complex. On a $120 million sale, My earned commission amounted to exactly $3.2 million. It was a standard industry payout for a portfolio director who had single-handedly built and maintained the asset's occupancy value over 2 decades. Julian, however, viewed my contract as an unacceptable drain on his deal proceeds. He couldn't digest the fact that a property manager who drove an 8-year-old pickup truck would walk away with $3.2 million from his crown jewel deal. He began searching for any leverage to invalidate my commission structure. He demanded that I sign a voluntary contract modification reducing my transaction fee to a flat $50,000 bonus. When I sat in his corner office in late August and politely declined his demand, Julian's face flushed dark red. He slammed his Mont Blanc pen onto his glass desk and sneered that loyalty had an expiration date in modern real estate. What Julian failed to realize was that contracts cut both ways, and in commercial land trust law, the fine print always outlives executive arrogance. During the first week of September, Julian began setting his trap. He brought in Donald Briggs, a ruthless corporate attorney known for slashing executive contracts during distress restructurings. Together, they initiated a surprise internal audit of the last 5 years of commercial tenant leases at Metro Central Plaza. Julian was hunting for any administrative anomaly he could reframe as gross negligence. When you manage 45 enterprise-level commercial leases across 2 decades, ranging from 50,000 square foot corporate office spaces to ground floor retail franchises, there are always customized tenant improvement allowances, rent abatement structures, and parking credit adjustments. Every single allowance in our files had been fully vetted, signed off by Gordon Vance, and registered with the city clerk. But Julian didn't care about historical reality. He cared about creating a paper trail of pretext. On Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks before the scheduled October 1st closing of the $120 million sale to Crestview Capital, Donald Briggs sent me a formal memo. The memo alleged that I had granted unauthorized rent abatements totaling $420,000 to our anchor grocery tenant, West Side Market, back in 2021 during municipal street utility work. Julian claimed this constituted a breach of fiduciary duty, giving Apex prime cause to terminate my employment agreement immediately and forfeit all accrued transaction commissions. I walked into Julian's 12th floor corner office, holding the original 2021 lease amendment file. I placed the document on his desk, pointing directly to Gordon Vance's bold signature authorizing the temporary rent relief to prevent the grocery store from vacating during the city's sewer main replacement. Julian didn't even open the file. He leaned back in his leather executive chair, folded his hands behind his head, and smirked. He told me that Gordon was elderly, retired, and no longer possessed executive operational authority over Apex Prime. Julian declared that under current corporate governance, those allowances were unapproved concessions. He offered me an ultimatum: sign a full waiver of my $3.2 million master transaction fee by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, or face immediate termination for cause, accompanied by a corporate lawsuit for breach of duty. I looked Julian dead in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam his door. I simply picked up the file and said that I would give his proposal the exact consideration it deserved under the law. When 5 p.m. Wednesday came and went, without my signature on his waiver, Julian called an emergency executive board meeting for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. The conference room was filled with 6 junior board members and Donald Briggs. Julian stood at the head of the long mahogany table with a projected slide deck behind him. He delivered a polished presentation, claiming that by terminating my outdated position and eliminating my commission structure, Apex Prime would instantly boost the net transaction yield on the Crestview Capital buyout by $3.2 million. He framed my 22 years of operational stewardship as redundant legacy overhead that was dragging down corporate margins. "Nathaniel," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension as he shoved a 4-page separation agreement across the table. "You had a good run here under my father, but modern commercial real estate requires agile, modern leadership. We are streamlining operations prior to the Crestview acquisition. Turn in your master key cards, clear out your office by noon today, and hand over all digital property access credentials to Mr. Briggs. Donald Briggs added that if I attempted to contact any of the Plaza's subtenants or interfere with the Crestview purchase agreement, Apex Prime's legal team would file an immediate restraining order and seek punitive damages in district court. The room went dead silent. The junior board members looked down at their notebooks, unwilling to challenge the founder's son. Julian sat back with a self-satisfied grin, convinced he had outmaneuvered a veteran property director and saved the company millions. I picked up the pen sitting next to the document. I turned to page 4, reviewed the severance terms, which offered zero compensation and demanded a total waiver of claims, and signed my name clearly at the bottom. I pushed the signed paper back across the table. "Are you not going to argue, Nate?" Julian chuckled, visibly disappointed that I hadn't lost my temper or begged for a compromise. "No speech about loyalty? No threats of litigation?" "I don't make speeches in boardrooms, Julian," I replied calmly, standing up and buttoning my navy suit jacket. "The documents speak for themselves. You've made your position entirely clear, and so have I." I checked my wristwatch. It was exactly 10:35 a.m. I walked out of the conference room, walked down the corridor to my corner office, and placed my personal items into a small cardboard box. My family photos, my desk clock, and a framed photograph of the 2006 ribbon-cutting ceremony with Gordon Vance. I handed my building access badge to the security guard standing outside my door and walked out to the parking garage. As I drove my truck out of the subterranean garage, Julian was already popping champagne bottles in the executive lounge, celebrating what he believed was a $3.2 million victory. He had no idea that when he signed my termination notice, he had set off a ticking legal clock that would dismantle his entire career before the sun went down. I drove straight from Metro Central Plaza to the downtown law office of Victoria Shaw, a veteran commercial real estate attorney who had managed our family trust's legal affairs for nearly 15 years. Her office on the 24th floor of the Financial District Center overlooked the very skyline that Metro Central Plaza dominated. Victoria was sitting at her heavy oak conference table, surrounded by stacks of real property title records, municipal zoning maps, and land registry binders. When I walked in, placed my personal box on a side chair, and handed her my signed termination paper, she didn't look surprised. She opened a thick blue leather-bound binder containing the original 2006 Master Ground Lease Agreement executed between the Miller Ground Trust and Apex Prime Properties. "Julian really didn't read the master title filings, did he?" Victoria asked, shaking her head as she flipped through the yellowed pages to Section 14. "Julian thinks commercial real estate is played on corporate spreadsheet pitch decks and glossy marketing slide decks," I said, pouring myself a cup of black coffee. "He never bothered to pull the underlying fee simple ground covenants recorded with the county clerk 20 years ago." Victoria pointed her pen directly at Clause 14, titled Executive Operating Standards and Master Trustee Reversion Privileges. "When my father and Gordon Vance negotiated the original 20-year lease back in 2006, my father had insisted on protecting my executive position and our family's underlying land asset against future corporate raiders, hostile board restructuring, or predatory institutional buyouts. Section 14 contained 3 explicit, legally binding provisions that Julian Vance and Donald Briggs had completely overlooked in their frantic rush to save $3.2 million in transaction fees. First, the master ground lease for the 12 acres beneath Metro Central Plaza was set to expire at midnight on October 1, 2026. Any extension, recapitalization, lease assignment, or corporate title transfer to an external buyer, such as Crestview Capital, required the uncoerced written signature of the sole master trustee of the Miller Ground Trust. That trustee was me, Nathaniel Vance. Second, under Clause 14C, Apex Prime's legal right to occupy the land was explicitly contingent upon maintaining an active executive operational agreement with Nathaniel Vance as Senior Commercial Portfolio Director. The clause explicitly stipulated that if Apex Prime terminated Nathaniel Vance's employment without cause or without a unanimous board-approved monetary buyout of his trust interest prior to the ground lease expiration date, the master lease would instantly enter statutory default without the right to cure. Third, upon such default, the master ground lease automatically converted into a temporary holdover tenancy at a mandatory penalty rate of 400% of prevailing fair market commercial land rents. Based on current independent commercial real estate valuations, that holdover penalty amounted to exactly $2,400,000 per month, payable on the first calendar day of each month. Furthermore, under Texas Property Code Title 8, Chapter 93, governing commercial real estate tenancies, the ground fee owner retained an immediate unappealable right of re-entry and statutory tenant distraint. This meant our land trust had the absolute legal authority to order all 45 commercial subtenants to pay their rental escrows directly into our court-monitored trust account, bypassing Apex Prime entirely. By firing you without cause to dodge your $3.2 million master transaction fee. Victoria explained, a sharp smile spreading across her face as she highlighted the statutory references. Julian didn't just void your employment contract. He legally terminated Apex Prime's right to occupy the dirt beneath their 12-story commercial complex. As of 10:35 a.m. this morning, when you walked out of that boardroom, Apex Prime became an unauthorized trespasser on your family's land. What about the Crestview Capital buyout? I asked, leaning over the contract. Crestview Capital's lead title insurance underwriter will be performing their final title search and lien clearance check tomorrow morning, before authorizing the wire transfer of the $120 million purchase funds, Victoria replied. When their attorneys discover that Apex Prime does not possess a valid ground lease beyond October 1st, and that the underlying parcel is currently encumbered by an active statutory default notice, the title policy will be denied and the transaction will instantly freeze. Let's execute the legal filings, I said. For the next 3 hours, Victoria and her senior associates drafted 2 comprehensive legal enforcement notices. The first was a notice of master ground lease default and demand for immediate restitution of premises, served directly upon Apex Prime's executive suite via certified court process server. The document detailed Julian's material breach of Clause 14C, demanded immediate payment of the $2,400,000 monthly holdover penalty, and gave Apex Prime 72 hours to vacate the premises. The second filing was even more devastating to Apex Prime's corporate cash flow. Under Texas Property Code Section 93002, Victoria issued a formal notice of commercial distraint and rental escrow directive to all 45 subtenants of Metro Central Plaza, including national banking headquarters, flagship retail anchors, and corporate law firms occupying the tower. The directive legally instructed each commercial tenant to immediately halt all rent payments to Apex Prime properties and deposit their monthly rentals directly into the court-supervised Miller Land Trust escrow account until the title default was fully resolved by a district judge. At 2 o'clock on Friday morning, while Julian was asleep in his luxury high-rise condo, assuming his $120 million buyout was smooth sailing, court servers were delivering certified notice packets to every corporate tenant office and filing the lis pendens notice at the county land registry office. The legal mechanism was activated. The corporate trap Julian thought he had set for me was about to snap shut on his own career. On Friday morning at 8 o'clock, the financial storm hit Apex Prime Properties with catastrophic force. Julian arrived at Executive Suite 1200 expecting a victory lap and planning a celebratory lunch with his inner circle. Instead, he walked into a corporate war zone. His desk phone was ringing continuously, his mobile phone was buzzing with emergency text notifications, and his email inbox was overflowing with frantic messages from institutional partners and tenant legal departments. The first major blow landed at 8:15 a.m. The managing partner of Crestview Capital's commercial acquisition fund called Julian directly on speakerphone. Crestview's lead title insurance underwriter had flagged the county clerk's newly registered notice of lis pendens during their final pre-closing title audit. The underwriter revealed that Apex Prime's underlying ground lease expired on October 1st, that the master lease was currently in active statutory default due to an unremedied executive termination, and that Miller Ground Trust had asserted fee-simple reversion rights over the 12 acres. Crestview immediately halted the transfer of the $120 million purchase funds and informed Julian in no uncertain terms that unless clear title and an executed ground lease extension were delivered by Monday at 5 p.m., the acquisition agreement would be permanently terminated. Before Julian could even digest the imminent collapse of his flagship transaction, the second blow hit Apex Prime's balance sheet. At 9 o'clock, the chief legal officers of Westside Market, National Commercial Bank, and 5 major corporate subtenants sent formal legal acknowledgments to Apex Prime, citing the county court's distraint order under Texas Property Code. Chapter 93, every single major tenant confirmed that their upcoming October rent payments, totaling $1.5 million monthly, were being diverted into the court-supervised Miller Land Trust escrow account. Apex Prime's primary operational revenue stream was frozen solid in a matter of minutes. Julian panicked. He summoned Chief Legal Officer Donald Briggs to his corner office and screamed at him to explain how a property manager he had fired yesterday could shut down a $120 million buyout and seize corporate rent streams in less than 24 hours. Briggs, his face pale and sweating profusely under his collar, finally dug through the corporate legal archives and pulled the original 2006 Master Ground Lease Agreement. As he read Section 14 and checked the recorded title covenants, his hands began to tremble. For the first time, Briggs realized that Julian's greedy scheme to save $3.2 million had triggered an automated contract clause that stripped Apex Prime of its multi-million-dollar land asset, imposed a $2,400,000 monthly holdover penalty, and gave Nate absolute legal leverage over the company's survival. Between 10 o'clock and noon, Julian called my personal cell phone 47 times. He sent desperate text messages ranging from hostile threats of litigation to frantic pleas for an emergency meeting. I didn't answer a single call or respond to a single text. I sat calmly in Victoria Shaw's glass conference room, enjoying black coffee while watching the administrative disaster unfold across the downtown commercial district. At 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, Julian Vance and Donald Briggs arrived at the lobby of Victoria Shaw's law firm without an appointment. Julian's expensive designer suit jacket was crumpled, his silk tie was askew, and the arrogant smirk he had worn in the boardroom 4 hours earlier had completely vanished. Victoria walked out to the reception area and calmly escorted them into our glass-walled conference room, where I was sitting at the head of the table. "Nate," Julian shouted the moment the door closed behind them, slamming his leather briefcase onto the glass table. "What is the meaning of this illegal extortion? You've filed false cloud on title documents. You've interfered with an active corporate transaction. We will have you sued for tortious interference, blacklisted across the industry, and ruined in federal court." I leaned back in my chair, unbuttoned my suit jacket, and gestured toward the empty seats opposite me. "Take a seat, Julian. Threatening me won't extend your ground lease, and it certainly won't get Crestview Capital back to the closing table before Monday's deadline." Victoria placed 3 thick bound legal binders on the table directly in front of Donald Briggs. "Mr. Briggs," Victoria said in a cool, razor-sharp tone, "before your client makes any more actionable statements, I suggest you review Section 14C of the recorded 2006 deed, along with Texas Property Code Section 93.02. Your client terminated Mr. Vance without cause to evade a contractually earned transaction fee. By doing so, Apex Prime defaulted on the ground lease. As of right now, your company owes $2,400,000 in monthly holdover penalties, your subtenant rental streams are legally impounded, and your right of occupancy expires on October 1st. Briggs leaned over, flipped through the statutory filings for 2 minutes, and then quietly tapped Julian on the arm. "Julian, stop talking," Briggs whispered, his voice shaking. "They have us completely trapped. Everything they filed is rock solid under state property law." Julian stared at his attorney in absolute horror. "What do you mean they have us?" We own the 12-story corporate tower. You own the concrete, steel, and glass, Julian, I said, leaning forward and looking him dead in the eye. My family trust owns the dirt beneath it. And as of October 1st, if you don't have a signed ground lease extension from me, your building is sitting on my land without a permit. I can enforce physical eviction proceedings, collect holdover penalties, or lease the underlying ground out from under you. Julian collapsed into the leather chair, burying his face in his hands. The reality of his financial recklessness and corporate arrogance had finally shattered his illusion of control. "What do you want, Nate?" Julian mumbled, his voice barely audible. "What will it take to sign the ground lease extension and clear the title before Crestview walks on Monday?" I pulled a single sheet of paper from my leather portfolio and pushed it across the glass table. "Here are my non-negotiable settlement terms," I said calmly. "And you have until 5 p.m. today to accept them, or the price increases by $500,000 every hour." The settlement terms outlined on the single sheet of paper were total, uncompromising, and non-negotiable. First, Apex Prime Properties had to execute an immediate fee-simple land purchase agreement, buying out the Miller Ground Trust's underlying 12-acre parcel for $14,500,000 cash, a fair market valuation verified by an independent commercial appraisal team. Second, Apex Prime had to disburse my full earned master transaction fee of $3.2 million, without deductions, set-offs, or claims of administrative failure. Third, Apex Prime had to pay $800,000 in accrued legal fees, court filing costs, and liquidated holdover penalties resulting from Julian's unlawful termination notice. The total cash payout required to clear the title and allow the Crestview Capital buyout to proceed was exactly $18,500,000. Furthermore, the agreement required the immediate, permanent resignation of Julian Vance and Donald Briggs from all executive governance roles within Apex Prime Properties. Julian stared at the $18.5 million figure in utter disbelief, his face pale and drained of color. $18.5 million? He gasped, his voice cracking with desperation. "That's nearly 15% of the entire transaction proceeds. You're stripping away half of my corporate payout." "You didn't inherit a business, Julian," I replied coldly. "You inherited a 20-year master contract, and you deliberately broke it. You tried to steal my $3.2 million commission to inflate your personal bonus pool. Now, you are paying the market price of buying the ground you tried to walk on." Donald Briggs pulled Julian out into the conference hallway to confer in private. 2 minutes later, they returned, visibly shaken. Briggs explained that Apex Prime did not possess the legal authority to execute an $18.5 million emergency disbursement without the formal authorization of the board of directors and company founder, Gordon Vance. "Then you had better call Gordon immediately," Victoria said, pointing to the wall clock. "It is 3:15 p.m. on Friday. You have less than 2 hours before the County Land Registry office closes for the weekend." At 4 o'clock, an emergency secure teleconference was established between Victoria's conference room, the Apex Prime Board of Directors, and founder Gordon Vance, who dialed in from his medical recovery retreat in Arizona. When Gordon heard the full, unvarnished story, how his son had attempted to manufacture cause to default on my employment agreement, how Julian had deliberately concealed Section 14 from the board, and how Metro Central Plaza was facing immediate land forfeiture, the founder's fury shattered the corporate room. Gordon didn't mince words. He condemned Julian's reckless arrogance, called Donald Briggs a legal incompetent, and ordered the board to accept every single one of my settlement terms without modification. On the speakerphone, Gordon personally addressed his son. "Julian, you thought you were a financial prodigy by attempting to cheat the man who built this firm's foundational asset over 2 decades. You have embarrassed our family name, destroyed our institutional credibility with Crestview Capital, and cost this company $18 million. Effective immediately, you are stripped of all executive authority, your stock options are revoked, and you are permanently barred from entering any Apex Prime property." Julian sat frozen in his chair, completely broken and humiliated in front of the entire corporate leadership. The board of directors voted unanimously to approve the $18.5 million settlement and executed the fee simple land acquisition paperwork on Monday morning at 10:45 a.m. Victoria Shaw received formal bank wire confirmation. $18,500,000 had been successfully transferred directly into the Miller Ground Trust master account. Once the funds were fully verified, I signed the fee simple deed conveyance and master ground lease release, delivering clean, unencumbered title to Crestview Capital. At 11:30 a.m., Crestview finalized the wire transfer for the $120 million purchase agreement, completing the institutional buyout of Metro Central Plaza. Julian walked out of Executive Suite 1200 with his personal office items packed in a cheap cardboard box, the exact same way he had forced me to walk out 4 days earlier. His career in commercial real estate was permanently destroyed, and his father stripped his voting equity from the family trust. Donald Briggs resigned in disgrace before the board could initiate formal bar complaints against him. As for me, I took 2 months off to travel with my family and enjoy the fruits of 22 years of hard work. In early December, I launched Vance & Miller Commercial Land Advisory, a boutique consulting firm specializing in ground lease, structuring, municipal land trusts, and commercial asset protection. Every once in a while, as I drive past Metro Central Plaza and see the magnificent 12-story commercial complex glowing against the downtown skyline, I smile. Arrogant executives and corporate heirs often believe that title, money, and position grant them absolute control over others. But in commercial real estate, power doesn't belong to the loudest man in the boardroom. It belongs to the man who owns the dirt beneath their feet and knows every line of the fine print.